and it was a first mover, gave me a first mover advantage. Of course, I am not going to open source that in the beginning. Why? Because it costs a lot of time and effort in order to be able to get that done.
Hello, and thank you for joining our Fireside Chats with founders at the European Cardano community. I am Marcus, one of the core team members, and if you like what we are doing, please consider supporting our individual projects. You will find the links to our guests and our projects below the video. Please give us a thumbs up, follow us by hitting the bell icon, and let's enjoy this session.
Cool. So, thank you very much for being here, guys. I start usually with hello to send good vibes to everybody. So yes, Marcus already said almost everything. We are the European Cardano community. We try to facilitate the business creation on Cardano and to promote new projects in the way we can. We have a nice YouTube channel where we publish all the recordings of our chats and meetings. It's nice. Something else we do, and sorry, but I can't show it in the presentation in the slides because for some reason I deleted them before publishing it. But we also do Twitter Spaces in very many languages spoken in the European region. So if you have friends speaking a different language than English and want to talk about Cardano or anything about Cardano, any project on Cardano with the maximum freedom, please tell us and we'll facilitate it as well and we'll make it happen as soon as possible. Other than that,
we also have currently German ones running, and on Sunday we start with the English version. We call it Late Night Unicorns, matching the UK. And one of the hosts will be Gavin from Promofacy, and Davide will be so nice to host it because you can't get me as a family man into a Sunday night talk. No way. I might join, but I'm not going to commit to hosting it every time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Davide.
No problem. I don't have children, so I have more freedom in that extent, and you are doing really a lot in everything else about the European community. So thank you for what you do. So that I think that we can already kickstart our chat. Is somebody wants to talk about Tauri by chance here?
Sure, I'd love to. So I'm Daniel.
Take it away, please.
I've been here in Europe for like 25 years, and I feel like Tauri itself is a very European project. It is hosted by a Dutch foundation called the Commons Conservancy, which is a project that exists to support open source projects. And, Tauri, if you've never heard of it before, is a framework that helps developers make small performance software for the desktop and the mobile ecosystems. And right now, why I'm here, banging the drum, isn't for us to get more stars on GitHub, because right now I think we're something like the number 77th most starred project on GitHub, number 3 in Rust. Tauri is used by Tencent, Microsoft, Intel, Cloudflare, a whole bunch of those, projects you might have heard of. But actually, to talk to you all about the incoming new legislation around the Cyber Resilience Act and the Product Liability Directive, I was concerned about it when it came up that it seemed like this was going to have a big impact on open source. And thanks to some friends and some engagement from the amazing open source community, we were able to convince the European Commission that open source isn't the same as big business, right? And I think that maybe later on when we get to the discussion part, we could talk more about what it means to manufacture software for Europe and what it means to be a consumer, what kinds of rights are now coming into play for the consumers, and ultimately what we can do and what we are doing and how you can get involved. So I'm really, really happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Looking forward to the convo.
Nice to be here, Daniel. I will now ask if it's possible for James to give us an introduction about USDM. Everybody knows you, of course, but I don't have, unfortunately, also your slide here.
Well,
so if we can, sorry, today was very fortunate.
there's one thing. James is not particularly talking about USDM, if I'm correct today, so don't want to set the wrong expectations.
It'll be a mix, Marcus, I think, both what I've been doing in the space and, of course, USDM. So I can represent USDM. I did not put any slides in, David. I just simply did not understand the instructions, nor did I honestly read them. GitHub, when I get into it, I immediately have an aversion to it, and I just want to leave immediately. It's almost like some of my friends with Discord, so I do apologize for that. But it is not my favorite place to be. I do appreciate you guys that do it on a regular basis. But yeah, so I do apologize for that. So, as far as myself, my name is James Meidinger. I've been with USDM now for approximately 3 years. I've been in the crypto space for about 6 years now. I actually started out over on Reddit and then jumped into Robinhood. Didn't know I didn't own any of the underlying assets when I was trading them. And honestly, probably didn't care either. But then from there, found myself gravitating towards Cardano after a really just extraordinarily bad experience with Ethereum. So that pushed me into looking for other things that were supposed to be better than what I'm currently experiencing in the traditional finance, banks experiences, the fees associated with it. Everything that goes along with that. Self-sovereign means something to me, and I was looking for it, and I did not find it in Ethereum. I found a much worse, more expensive, higher fee, less customer service oriented platform that was not there to service my needs, but there to extract value. So then from there, I found Cardano, and away I went. So I've been here for, like I said, now about 4 years almost 5 years in Cardano now, and with USDM for the last 3. So that is a little bit about me.
Awesome.
Nice, thank you. So we switch to Marco.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I go by Marco. That is not my real name, but I only selectively dox to certain folks when necessary, like Elder and James, of course. But yeah, so I work in TradFi. I manage kind of model portfolios and fund of funds for all different types of clients, from retail distributed through like advisors or intermediaries, all the way up to kind of institutions like endowments and foundations through like an OCIO framework. So I manage, asset allocation portfolios for my day job. Been in crypto probably 5-6 years now, end of 2019, early 2020. And just kind of hopped around all over the place. I've been on many different chains, still am on many different chains. I've found that there's a lot of cool stuff happening, a lot of primitives being developed. DeFi is its own ecosystem, and there's a lot of things that are, recreating and kind of speed running what TradFi has done for hundreds of years in the span of a couple of years. So it's evolving at an insane pace. So it's been really interesting. I help out a handful of projects, either through an advisory type of role or on the DAOs directly. So I sit on a bunch of different working groups within Cardano, like MinSwap, Optum, Cerberus would be the 3 main ones I spend my time on. And then outside of Cardano, IPOR, which is the Fusion EVM kind of protocol, I spend most of my time on outside of the Cardano ecosystem. It's a bit about me.
Awesome.
Thank you, Marco. So, Elder, do you want to tell us something about yourself as well, please?
Yeah, sure. So I guess maybe I'll start off kind of just saying that, like, I ran into Marco because he and I have kind of run into the same groups on Cardano. So I do not have a finance background. My background's actually in artificial intelligence, medicine, and biology. So Man, where's a good place to get started on this? I started off in the MinSwap community, which is an excellent community. There's a lot of really friendly and knowledgeable people in there. And actually, I would just kind of say, as I've kind of branched out a little bit more from just, being exclusively in MinSwap, I would just kind of say most of the Cardano community is they're very knowledgeable and also very just kind of welcoming and accepting just in general. So one of the things that's really helped me as someone who works more on the development side of things is ask a lot of questions and get a lot of really well-informed answers. So that kind of led me to, as I was kind of looking through things and to try to understand exactly how everything worked. I ended up developing a bunch of kind of open source tools. So Daniel, I understand exactly, like I'm much more so an open source kind of person just in general. But that also kind of led me to creating a DEX aggregator called SteelSwap. So I'm the founder and maintainer of SteelSwap. And then again, yeah, I work with a bunch of different DEXs and DeFi projects running, analysis, creating new different types of algorithms for different things. Yeah, I guess that's a little bit about me. I've been around Cardano for probably about 2 years or so now. And then I co-authored a liquidity proposal that I think we'll get into a little bit more. So I co-authored that with Marco.
That would be exactly what I wanted to do the connection with, because that's how you basically proposed for tonight or today or this morning, whenever you're watching this. So what is it about with the liquidity proposal, and what is your experience in the collaboration process that also Daniel sees the challenge with that? I mean, we've heard James being a little bit agnostic to GitHub, but how can we basically bond between traditional, I just call it traditionals, or elder millennials like us, and open source? Because blockchain tries to sell open source as it is, and yet we fail to onboard people to GitHub.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, I
interesting.
mean, I'm sorry, what was that?
No, interesting. It was an interesting note from Marcus.
Yeah, so I mean, I think Cardano in particular, there's a bit of a steep learning curve just because of the UTXO model that it has. And I think that actually makes it like open source just kind of as the complexity of your systems become increasingly high, I think there's more and more of a demand for open source just to try and help get a lot of new developers or new anybody coming into the space and trying to wrap their head around, well, how do I do something? Right. Like I think that's a very critical component to it. But at the same time, as I'm sure Daniel is super well familiar with, trying to monetize something and at the same time, like being very committed to your open source values can be quite a difficult task to navigate. Because on some level, you're almost giving away your business by giving away your actual code, right? Like your intellectual property. But at the same time, you also want, the entire community to thrive, because if you're not actually putting out ways of being able to integrate in with your project, people are going to have a harder time working with it, right? So that's I guess that, maybe to answer your question a little bit, is that, I think there needs to be, some kind of solid approach to, or I don't know, actually this is always kind of the problem just in the open source community, just in general, like trying to monetize and keep your actual thing going. And that's, I think something that Cardano is going to have to struggle with again, just because of the complexity of Cardano. And then also, kind of that double-edged sword of trying to do things in the open source world.
Daniel?
You know, I've been affiliated with open source for over 2 decades. Not quite as long as the term's been around, but long enough. And I think that there's always a risk that we conflate the license of some copyrightable intellectual property, like you said, Elder, with the community. Right? We say open source project, but a lot of times what we mean are the people that are enjoyers of the open source, or that are authors or maintainers or even critics, right? And um, finding a way to keep the community together, I feel, has to be the primary charge of the project, right? Because I feel like the project is always this mixture of ideals and code and um, and people coming together to do awesome stuff, right? And the whether or not something is complicated, I think that matters less, right? Right now, Tauri services 5 platforms: Mac, Windows, Linux, iOS, and Android. And the way that it does this is by a very complex interaction with the various operating systems, and it requires expertise, and it requires people that pay attention, and it requires money. So, I mean, what I can tell you is that through the course of my career as I'll call it an entrepreneur. Sometimes it feels more like someone who spends a lot of time cheerleading. But in my career, I very intentionally invested a large portion of the funds that I've raised directly into the Tauri project. So it's impossible to capitalize. You're never going to put it on your balance sheet. It's a decision we made for the common good. And I don't know. I see where the worry you have, Elder, that, oh gosh, what happens if people aren't contributing anymore? And I have one memory that before I'll pass it off, but I have one memory where the week leading up to the announcement of Tauri 1.0, which was a couple years ago, in that week, 2 projects announced that they were deprecating. It was Internet Explorer and Atom Shell. Why do you deprecate a project? It's because nobody cares anymore. Times have moved on. The technology is no longer relevant. And I think that, that's the worst definition of done that I've heard. Like, you put all this time and energy into something, and then no one cares anymore, and no one's investing time and love into it. Well, maybe it is important to also like have that internal biological clock that says, well, this project is over, and I'm going to move on to something else.
That makes it even more challenging in the end, right? Because even first of all, you are an entrepreneur. Second, it makes it more challenging in my eyes to say, I'm investing time into the development and the community without actually promoting the way that you got to earn something at some point, right? But then it replicates. Like it's a shift of the investment curve at some point, because then you have the marketing folks distributed and decentralized, basically. Marco, and then James, because then you're the opposite, who would say, what would the layman say about open source, and the guy who really says, nah. Marco, please, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I think open source is an absolute necessity, but the funding is always the challenge, right? There's only so many grants that you can give. So I think it's all about licensing, and I don't know enough. I'm like the least qualified person here to be commenting on on open source, maybe economics in general. But I think it's a complete necessity, and I'm glad to be seeing that not only are these different blockchains open source projects that people can build on, but that projects built on top are willing to open source some of their logic. Now, how they, not that we've seen many projects that are profitable, but how they actually continue to maintain their own ecosystem, community, and effectively profitability. Because at some point in time, you think of a DEX or I don't know, any sort of protocol. At some point in time, the funding that they raised, whether it be public or private, will run out, and they need to continue to sustain themselves. And there's one part, there's people that say, great, you release a bunch of smart contracts on a chain and it just lives on forever. And that's great, but V2 of Uniswap, which is what a majority of the DEXs that exist on Cardano right now effectively do, is not the most efficient way to be doing trading and to be doing liquidity provisioning. That's why Uniswap has V3. That's why Uniswap has V4, right? And they have funding. They have their own setup, legal setup that's completely different than many other protocols. But at some point in time, you cannot theoretically continually raise publicly or privately from investors, and you need to fund yourself. So that's the challenge here. I'd be curious to see how all these ecosystems evolve over time. You can look at the Solana ecosystem, and what people have done is they have not open sourced. There's very few open source projects on Solana because they have their own IP and they did not want to share that IP with others. There's definitely projects on Cardano that are a little bit of both. I think MinSwap's batchers were, I don't know if they still are closed sourced, but some of the logic's open source, right? So like you get this framework of how do we keep our IP private but still provide tooling for the community to continue to develop around us. And I'm not sure what the answer is.
Can I just jump in there for a second?
Sure.
Of course.
Free software was sort of defined by this bunch of crazy hippies who believed that property was theft, and this whole communist idea of it's good as long as we can share it. If we're sharing it, it's good. Otherwise, you're stealing my agency from me, right? I'm not saying I agree with that, but I think that the dichotomy that you're bringing up, Marco, really points to this frustration that we have this innate feeling, or I do at least, that open source is a good thing. And then we realize it takes a lot of time and effort, actually more than is worthy of a hobby. So who's going to pay me to do this? Actually, basically nobody. And yet they're happy to take it for free. As soon as I start trying to charge for a service, they're like, well, I'll go somewhere else. I mean, look at HashiCorp. As soon as you change the license or Mongo, there's thousands of stories of these license rug pulls where you build a community with an open source, you get people addicted to the software, then you change the license so they have to start paying for it because, oh my God, we exist in a world where money is actually a real thing, and you have to pay rent, and you have children, and you stay with them on a Sunday evening instead of hanging out with the crypto bros. And, even those of us who've been doing Bitcoin for 2 decades, is it 2 decades, right? Sorry. A decade, a little bit more than a decade. Like even those of us who got in early and were able to make mints doing it, we still get confronted with, okay, what do I do with the money? How do I use this money? And that's something that I feel like the whales out there, if you're listening, I'm sure there's a couple of you should really put money back into the ecosystem that you took value from. I feel like there's definitely ways to do that are good for people and for communities, and yet as soon as you get rich you stop caring, or what? I don't know, maybe that's a hot take.
There's some sort of question that ties to it. Does open source foster entitlement? that's the flip side, right? James.
I'm a capitalist by nature. I ran a business for a very long time. It was extraordinarily important for me to consistently think about cash flow, how I'm leveraged, where my market is, how much of the market that I've taken from others, how competitive I am. Of course, I always had to, work around pricing and things of that nature. I never had anything that I ultimately created ahead of time. I used somebody else's business model and I just made it better. And I provided a better level of service, a better level of machine, and everything else that went along with that, right? And from there, I lasted for 25 years within that business. The one thing I open sourced is like every single piece of knowledge I knew about vending, refreshment service industry, I would give to others, and I would give it freely. This did a couple things. One is that it caught a few early in order to educate them on just exactly what they were getting into, because maybe they watched a few videos, they had no idea just exactly what it was, and they were actually getting into a legitimate business that was going to cost money, and they might need to know a few things about how to manage that, right? The other part of that is how to market yourself, just exactly what you're going to be offering. What is your ethos? What exactly do you plan to be? I came in as a value vendor. I did not come in as somebody that was in it to make the best margin I could on each individual sale and things like that. So when I started reaching out to those people, I caught a few of them and actually stopped them before they even got into the business because they were not prepared and or ready to get into that business. The other ones that were, then from there, I gave them every little bit of information that I could, including all the vendors I worked with, in order to give them their best possible chance of success. So in that regard, and I still do this to this day. I'm out of that business, and I still do it when I get calls. I'll still answer calls and talk to people and let them know, just exactly how to avoid the pitfalls and what to look for, and whether or not this is something they should be in. When it comes to open source here in Cardano or in crypto as a whole, I found that there's quite a few people, and this made sense to me, that if I created something and it was a first mover, gave me a first mover advantage, of course, I am not going to open source that in the beginning. Why? Because it costs a lot of time and effort in order to be able to get that done. So when there were calls by the community to open source because you just should do that, that to me seemed foreign and also a mistake if they were to do something like that. You can open source it later once you've recouped your investment potentially. But until then, I've always seen it as something that it shouldn't be open source. Now, there could be certain things you could open source within it and what have you, depending on what it was, certain tooling, whatever the case may be. But ultimately, the main product you would want to keep closed source until you were ready, because ultimately, if you just gave it away, then other people take it, and then potentially they might be a better marketer, they might be a better, salesman, they might be a better innovator. They might have better connections within the community that you're currently operating in, and then they take your market share and eat your lunch. So to me, that always never really made sense. At the same time, I've witnessed people who, let's say a particular lab, I won't name the name of it, but they've used other people's open source. They paid attention, right? So they knew where these projects had either been funded, they actually even produced a particular product, but they didn't, it's in some repo somewhere and no one knew about it. Then they started selling that particular product to other people that didn't know until they got into one of our spaces and started talking about it. I'm like, oh yeah, somebody just pops in and goes, that was in that repo, for example, right? So, there are opportunists. There are people thinking short and long term. And I would say that I fall in the category of a long term. I'm an opportunist to the point of I'm looking to garner market share within the company that I currently work for. And at the same time, make sure that Cardano is represented in a way that is the best foot forward into the wider blockchain space. So in that regard, there's a little bit we have closed source, to what we do. But part of that is just mission critical to what we do. And of course, there's security features that have to be upheld, consistent with, what we're doing, right? So we don't want everybody to know exactly what we're doing because they may be able to exploit that particular thing. So other than that, though, I see us really kind of being a advocate for future open source, a variety of different projects that we're currently working with in order to then help others get a foot up or a leg up into our particular space, because that makes everybody better, right? So that's kind of my particular take on it, Marcus.
There's an example.
Sorry. Just to kind of hone in on something you said there, James, that's kind of more so the angle that I was kind of talking about is that there's a bit of a double-edged sword in doing open source stuff, especially when you're trying to build some kind of application or product, right? Where if you basically give it all away for free, then it's kind of like, well, how do I support myself and fund myself, et cetera. So just to, I'll use Steel Swap as an example, right? So it's a DEX aggregator that runs on Cardano. And what we've done is like rather than open source the entire project, what we did was we open sourced probably about what I would consider to be 80% of it or so. So we, in collaboration with Charlie 3, we released an open source Python project called Dendrite. And what that allows you to do is do like direct interactions with decentralized exchanges. So like using this tool, you can like submit swaps to MinSwap, Sunday Swap, et cetera. And like the idea here is that, the magic behind what Steel Swap does is not the actual mechanism of actually doing things on chain. The actual magic behind what it does is actually how do you actually figure out what the best, price is if you're going to try and take whatever order that you want and then split it out across all of the exchanges, right? So and what that does is a couple of things, right? So one thing that it does is it allows us to make our code better because it's something we can build a community around because then people can actually start using Dendrite to actually start building their own applications on Cardano. But the other thing that it does is it gives us a way to actually fund the development of Dendrite at the same time. So we can actually, we have a vested interest in maintaining this open source project because we're running our business on it, right? And that's exactly what, just kind of going to your point, James, is that, this is what I was talking about in terms of like, there's a fine line to walk in terms of like trying to open source things and like trying to make sure that you can do a couple of other things at the same time, run a business and also make sure that it has long-term sustainability in terms of like the ability to maintain it. But actually, I'm sorry, just to kind of say what Daniel was saying as well, though, like, these things really only survive in the long term if you have a really well-developed community around it, right? Like, I mean, it's great that I developed it and we have a good way of being able to maintain that over the long term through like funding that's coming through with Steel Swap. But, for real long-term sustainability, you really have to develop a really passionate community because then once you do that, it starts to really kind of take on a life of its own.
I have a good example to that. Insomnia. You might know it if you code. It's kind of Postman. And James, it's an API to test your code, basically, right? Okay. So what happened here is they've built a pretty strong community, and then at some point they introduced a pricing model, and the community went outrageous. They went nuts, and the first thing that happened is that somebody created a fork and said, "Okay, here you can have it. It's all for free," right? So that exactly underlines, I think, the importance to give it a number, 20% private. But so a strong community is not everything. You need to be a little bit selfish, most probably, I guess. But maybe, Daniel, you can prove me wrong from your experience. But just hopping, doing a little bit of a switch, and then we can come back, of course. How does a strong community or and a tight budget go hand in hand with building liquidity? Because that's what you both guys been talking about. We have low liquidity, and how can we start? And maybe this is also kind of a blueprint for small projects that say, okay, I have a token, I'm just starting out, I want to make it as fair as possible, yet I want to benefit from it, which is totally fair for a project, right? Because you need to pay your developers, you need to pay yourself, etc., etc. And how do you think about that, or how do you build that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it kind of does tie back because if you think about the Cardano treasury, that is there for continual development of the community in general and the chain, right? So there's a couple of things. One is, there is plenty of ADA around. Very little of it, I don't know what the percentage, but very little of it is on chain actually doing something, right? In any sort of DeFi, beyond DeFi, doing anything. So the question is, what should we do about that? Is that okay? I guess the first question is that okay? I would argue no. We built, not me. I'm not involved at all in Cardano generally, but it was built to be a smart contract platform, in my opinion, right? That's what attracted me to Cardano in the first place. And in order to build a smart contract platform, you need the ability to swap between tokens, right? The reason there's Cardano native tokens is so that we can transact between these tokens. So couple things. One is liquidity is extremely important. There's not that much on Cardano, but liquidity is a general term, right? There's ADA liquidity, there's token XYZ liquidity, there's token ABC liquidity. What I think is extremely important is stablecoin liquidity. Reason being is if you are a new project, you want to decentralize yourself, you need a token. You're going to use that token as governance. What do you want to pair that token with? Right? As soon as you decide I'm going to pair my token with ADA, that's where I'm going to provide all of my liquidity, you have tied the price of your token to ADA. There is a high correlation between every CMT out there and ADA. You have no choice. That is where the liquidity is. That is what people hold on chain. You have absolutely no choice but to tie your coins, your tokens, price to the ADA price. So what should you do about that? Now, if you look at more developed ecosystems, DeFi ecosystems, many of them will launch more of their liquidity with USDC or USDT. Point being, they don't necessarily want their price tied to the price of ETH or Sol or whatever token you want to whatever L1 token you want to launch on. So I think we need generally broader liquidity of stable coins in the ecosystem. And that is the point of the proposal that Elgar and I put together. There is not a lot of liquidity on chain. How can we get more liquidity on chain? I think it would be prudent for the Cardano treasury to willingly sell some of its ADA into USD and start to provide broader liquidity, deploy that USDC into stablecoins like USDM, for example. And we can talk about how you choose stablecoins because there's many out there on Cardano already. But deploy that USD into stablecoins and then deploy those stablecoins on chain. The whole point of this is to get some amount of ADA on chain, not just ADA on chain, but stablecoins on chain, providing liquidity. And providing liquidity is a general term, right? I keep saying that. You can provide liquidity by liquidity provisioning on a DEX. So one example would be USDA and USDM, pair them together and provide liquidity that way. One might be USDM paired with ADA, provide liquidity that way. One might be just taking USDM and putting it into a lending protocol, because just supplying liquidity into a lending protocol allows others who might have a lot of ADA who don't want to sell their ADA, they can borrow against that ADA to extract that liquidity from that the treasury supplied and use that either to lever up, to loop, to spend if they want, right? So the whole idea is let's find a way to bring more stablecoin liquidity on chain. And as we do that, as you see more volume, not just liquidity, but volume, you'll actually bring more participants into the ecosystem. We don't have many sophisticated market makers on chain right now. And the way to bring sophisticated market makers on chain who are willing to actually put in their inventory, take risk on their books, is knowing that there's liquidity on chain for them to enter and exit. So I think, you'll see more liquidity, you'll see more volume, you'll see more development on chain. People will be willing to actually spend the resources to deploy new projects, new ideas on chain if they start to see more volume, deeper liquidity, easier access to trade between stables and CNTs.
Yeah.
In general.
Thanks.
So that's at high level.
Thank you, Marco. I just want, if anybody saw the message from Marcus in the chat, that is a very interesting question. Doesn't tying CNTs to stablecoins will trigger MiCA compliance problems, issues?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have no idea.
I was going to say, I think that might be a James question.
Yeah. James would have a better idea.
I am not the person who put this together having to do with the MiCA compliance. The white paper was put out. There are, I would say, so there's a little bit of the language in there talks about systemic and non-systemic risk. Systemic risk is anything that's payment oriented, where there's a variety of things that are dependent upon, if you're going into a store or this or that, they want to protect that in order to make sure that that particular part of it is okay. So when it comes to systemic, our stablecoin company doesn't want to be a part of that particular process where we're actually backing, let's say, a payment processing company, or the backing for the entire amount, that's sitting within that in order to be able to produce that payment system, like say a credit card company or something like that, for example. So the non-systemic side would be more along the side of what we're working with. When you're tying CNTs to that, that's just creating a market within a centralized exchange. I'll use Norwegian Block Exchange, for example, because it's currently already happening. USDM is paired with Hosky, and it's also paired with ADA over there. Now, Hosky token obviously is a meme token. There's quite a bit of it out into the market. And what it does is it produces a higher transaction volume, which is going to be very helpful for an exchange, simply because that's how they make their money. When it comes to ADA, for example, it's also one of those things where now you have people who have USCM, let's say, for example, and they want to move into ADA in order to then offload that into fiat, let's say, for example, or they wanted to move it from ADA into USCM and they have that off ramp into fiat, and then they can do that. Which is extraordinarily important. So when it comes to that, Marcus, it's not necessarily a systemic risk, that particular portion of it. In my view, I'm not the lawyer. However, the language does suggest that these particular things will be okay. When it comes to building in a small market, that's a very difficult thing to do. And we have what's called Catalyst, which allows for Cardano to which is genius in my opinion, that you can fund a great deal of things. In essence, shotgun blast this money out, which they did. Fund 3 through Fund, I'm going to say 8, was literally a shotgun blast to whatever it is that anybody's willing to build in order to just create activity. There's new repo, Git repo, the pull requests, all the stuff that goes along with that, right? Shows activity on chain and things like that. But ultimately, how much did we get for our money? I'm not really sure. However, what it did do is it offered for those who wanted to build something and were okay with looking into a smaller market. That might have meant because they didn't feel as though they could compete in larger market, and or they had a novel approach that worked in Cardano way better and felt as though they could build a smarter, better mousetrap here. And from there, then start to garner market share from some of the big boys over in the other markets, right? So I think personally, that's probably the better approach. One of the reasons USDM is done as well as it's done, simply because we were funded by Catalyst and Fund 10. But it's difficult in the beginning with a small market. And so I've watched teams get funded, pay each other, the going rate, they put in GPT and go, how much should this marketing manager make? And it says $120,000 USD. And so they pay each other that, and then when the money runs out and they don't get through everything that they're supposed to do in their milestones, or something happens along the way, they go out, right? They're out, right? So is that a responsible way to come in and do that? No, it's more of a YOLO style, and not one that I would particularly recommend for anybody that's thinking about, I want to work in crypto long term. Now, you might have got lucky, just part of the team, it got funded and you made that money, and great, but ultimately, if you're thinking longer term, I think you're thinking more along the lines of being lean. One of the things that Matthew Plumman was very good at was being very lean. Him and his wife Jillian, our CEO, very good at managing money. I mean, heck, she's got 7 kids. I mean, you've got to be pretty good at it. So that comes by nature, for her. So we work with what we have available to us in order to make things happen. We don't pay each other a bunch of money. We are pleased and happy with what we have, and we're looking at long term. Does that mean that we've not been rewarded? No, it doesn't. We've gotten stock options and things like that have been included in that. Matthew's very good at that. We even went into a Reg CF and currently, offering that Reg CF on Cardano through Chainraise. So this has also given value to those who are working within the company. The problem with it is that what we're talking about with stablecoins is that, and what Marco was alluding to really, is that this needs to proliferate a bit. Because if you walk into a farmer's market and there's 5 vendors in there, not a lot of, options. Maybe they're okay with, what they're producing or they have out there on the table, but it's basic, right? And there's not competition, so you don't have anybody one-upping each other each week when they go to that market, trying to make things better in order to bring clients in. And then over a period of time, if it doesn't grow, people stop going to the market, and that's literally what we're in right now. So we found through USDC, and they're telling us that it's not us, it's you, right? And when they broke off the relationship, that ultimately, everybody got a sobering effect from that and realized that we're really on our own. Nobody's coming to save us, and we need to produce things on our own. I've done that my entire life, and I've done very well at it. So I see it here, and I want people to also see how it is you create a better market. And the way to do that is to bring in more liquidity into the market with a stable coin and offer more options for people to pair up with that liquidity. Increase the overall transaction volume on a 24-hour basis in order to be able to reduce slippage to a very minimal amount. Make the market available to where maybe even Genius Yield in an order book actually does well and they have liquidity and they can offer a better product simply because the P2P way that works and the transaction volume around that and the slippage is so small, they could actually compete much better. I mean, to me personally, it's a better business model, for a decentralized exchange. But we need the liquidity necessary in order to be able to bring that in. From there, as Marco alluded as well, bringing in market makers then that go, I've got some pretty good ideas. We've been doing this for a while somewhere else. Let's bring some of these in along with some higher liquidity and let's see what happens. Let's take a flyer, right? They don't necessarily know they're going to make money. There's no guarantee, but at the same time, there's a really good possibility that through their efforts, we actually increase overall usage, unique wallets, and transaction volume on chain, simply because the Treasury decided that we're going to bring in liquidity here. So for me personally, that it's important to remember how to manage a small business and to keep it lean and wait for those moments and try and create some of that success for yourself in order to be able to make that market bigger. And I think that's ultimately, I think that's what the stablecoin proposal is going to be doing when and if it gets approved.
Do you think it could work? Do you think it could work if a project, and I don't know if this hasn't been already tried, says I'm dropping like every time when I have the budget 100x or 1000x of this token and 1000x of this token into the pool, and then little by little it's going to be increased?
Are you talking about like a reinvestment strategy where you're doing that on a weekly basis? I mean, that's literally DCA in a nutshell, right? So I think
just the reverse order. Just the reverse order to basically increase the liquidity for your own project. Like
we have companies who are doing that now. Sunday Swap, for example, is doing that with their DAO, where they buy through their fees, they reinvest from the fees associated with ADA, and they turn that into USDM, and they put that as part of their treasury as a prudent reserve, because we all know a dollar is a dollar when it comes to USD. So they're good there. So if we go into a bear market, they've got something to lean on when things get lean, for example. So I would love to see more of that, but currently I think a lot of dApps are struggling, and instead of thriving, they're surviving right now. And it's simply because they're all fighting over the same 5,000 unique wallets that are trading in our DeFi space. That's a problem. So, obviously we need more people here. As I keep telling everybody, we need a better milkshake to bring all the users to the yard as far as that goes. So,
cool. Very cool. Guys, you are not doxed. Can you help me understand why not? Like, not in particular just both of you, but most people who are trying to build business, you are doing too. I understand that you have another life too, but you're not giving out the names. Is this more related to where do you work, or is this more related to you don't give your personal things away anyway in social media? What is it that hinders you to say, hey, I'm James Meidinger, and you can look me up anywhere where you want to?
Sure, I'm happy to answer. Mine is definitely about where I work. Heavily regulated. When I do advisory work for protocols, I have to get outside business activity approved by lawyers. It's painful. So if I was to, if anyone's read the proposal, the plan is to have a 7-person committee who is responsible for managing the ADA and getting it into USD and then getting it into stable coins and the actual supplying of liquidity, however that is done. So there will be a 7-person committee. Our current plan is to have 4 community members and 3 members of the 3 founding entities. If I was to be on that committee, I would feel like I should dox myself, and I would. As of now, it's not necessarily my plan. I want this proposal to be passed, right? I want this to be done because I like the Cardano community. I want to see Cardano ecosystem thrive. So this was just let me, for free, spend time with Elder and try and come up with a proposal that we think is, 1, necessary, but 2, extremely beneficial for the community. But yeah, if I was to sit on a committee with 5 million or 50 million ADA, basically managing 50 million ADA in a fiduciary capacity, I would feel more obligated to be doxxed. But as just a random person on the internet writing a proposal, I don't necessarily feel as much that is necessary. This is hey, this is a good idea. I think you should use it. It shouldn't matter who it came from. That makes sense.
Yeah, just doubting that somebody wouldn't find you if
I'm confident. I mean, my face is on here. It wouldn't be too hard.
Yeah, no, I'm generally, I mean, yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess on my side, this is actually the first time I've actually publicly showed my face ever at all. So I've been hyper secretive about myself in terms of identity. I mean, I have doxed myself to, a handful of people when it's required. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's largely I'm a relatively senior person at the company that I work for, and I direct a variety of teams in various aspects of artificial intelligence and biology and research and that kind of stuff. And some of the types of things that are types of contracts that we work with, because I do live in the United States. There was a certain hostility towards crypto before the most recent administration change. So, not that I foresaw any particular issues that could come out of that. Just as kind of an additional layer of security, I just kind of kept things locked down. There's also, and I mean, as I'm sure you guys have probably seen some of the horror stories of being a person on the internet and revealing who you are, and some of the things that can come out of that, just with a wife and kids, just that added layer of security is important. But I'm actually very much so on the same side as Marco here. As things progress, especially with the stuff for very large projects, kind of like what we're discussing in this proposal, I don't have any issues doxing myself, if I'm going to have any kind of involvement with that. So, and also, I guess I would say, you know, there's a little bit of additional nuance. Like with Steel Swap, we don't have a token, and actually, none of the projects that I am involved in, like they actually run. Well, I take that back. I collaborate with projects that do have tokens, but like I am never personally invested in any of those tokens myself. If I was, or if I took on some kind of a leading role on a project that had a token, I would feel much more obligated to try and, you know, dox myself just because I think there's an additional layer of trust that comes along with that.
Cool, thank you. It helps me a lot to understand that. Yes, I was always asking myself how that works. Very cool. Yeah, we're almost at the top of the hour. Did we miss something? Like what is, yeah, how does this goes back to James, and it can turn make its turn then to everyone. And I would then love to conclude with Daniel. How do you see business development different in Web3 than in Web2?
Well,
if there is one.
Considering the fact that I've never done business development in Web2, and I've done business development on the ground and running a business, I guess, but that was all face-to-face. Everything was worked through, relationships, which is the way I actually love to work. In Web3, I also believe that it needs to hold on to that as well. If you digitize everything and you sterilize everything and you remove the relationship aspect, the personal part of it aspect out of it, I personally believe that you're doing the community and the world at large and the people who live in it a disservice. Simply because you're slowly starting to disconnect everybody, because you can work on a remote little island with your, like I do here in this office, and I'm typically not talking to anybody. Over a period of time, that creates a problem. So I personally believe that if you're going to be good in Web3, you need to have a front-facing portion of it that is a human, has a human aspect to it. When it comes to customer service, I truly believe that with AI, you're going to completely replace the human when it comes to customer service. What's going to be interesting is that going to be a good thing or a bad thing? I personally I'm born in 1965, so I personally love talking to a human when I have a problem, simply because the current services that they offer via email, let's say for Coinbase, I'll use Coinbase as a great example. Coinbase requires an email, and then at one point they finally decided, you know what, we're going to have a call service that's going to answer a phone. That changed it for me. I was actually able to get actual real live customer service done. Before that, it was an email and I had to wait however long. What if it was a problem that I had right then? What option did I have? I'd have to drive to California or to San Francisco. I think that's where they're at, and go talk to them, right? So for me personally, it's still about relationships here. And if it's not at the customer level, it better be at the business level. So from B2B, if you are not touching base and still working with companies and making sure that you're known, thus the reason we have these conventions. Why do you think these conventions are so lively? Because everybody finally gets to see each other. They actually get to put a face to the voice that they've talked to, or an email or subject or whatever the case may be. They get to talk personally about what's going on with them. They inflect their actual facial expressions when they're talking about things, which you don't see otherwise. And I think if we lose that, I'm not sure if it's a business I want to be a part of, to be quite honest. So for me personally, it always needs to have a human element into it. And ultimately, I also feel as though those business relationships are some of the key components in order to create saturation within your market. If people find you kind, thoughtful, trustworthy, They then find you dependable. Once they find you dependable, you've been familiarized. Then from there, you are then recommended because they trust in you to be able to do exactly what you say you've been doing this entire time. And so without that, I see a bunch of companies failing miserably simply because they think they can take market share because they have better tech. But those relationships, how long are they going to last? When something comes up and there's a problem, how much rope do you have before they're going, we're probably going to look for a new vendor or something like that, right? So personally, I think for Web3 at least, there definitely still needs to be a human element, Marcus, or I'm not sure if I want to be a part of it, to be quite honest.
Would be Zoom enough for you?
It's enough until we get to meet in person, which, by the way, we have a date and we will meet in person at some point in our lives, for sure. And we can depend on that. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Marco or Elder?
Sure. Web3 is extremely interesting, right? It is, if you think about what it's meant to do at its core, the idea is to provide trustlessness guarantees to an extremely adversarial environment, right? Like at the end of the day, crypto, especially if you're doing any sort of trading, is extremely adversarial. Just look at pump.fun. Like it is completely extractive. That's the whole point of it. It is PvP and extremely extractive. So when you're building a business on the basis of we need to build a trustlessness core, knowing that at the end of the day, these are tokens that have a price and everyone's just trying to make some money. Not everyone, but that's what you have to come into this being. I think community is extremely important. So I'm a little bit younger than James. I may have grown up more on the internet than he has. I'll leave that out there. But like for me personally, I just jump into Discords and I just start chatting with people. I don't care who they are. I don't care if they're part of the team or not part of the team. We can have extremely enlightened conversations anonymously. You have absolutely no idea who I am. I have absolutely no idea who you are. You have absolutely no idea what my end goals are. It's completely asymmetric information at the end of the day. But I found that you can find extremely collaborative environments in this way. Like I met Elder, we had no idea who each other were. We just started chatting. I gave him some ideas. He gave me some ideas. We collaborated on projects that weren't even our projects, just to help out other teams. So I think like you build a community and it's extremely important. So I think community's one. And I also think you should compensate your community when you find someone who is extremely important and it is actually beneficial to you. They're going to stop at some point. It kind of gets back to the open source framework, right? Like at some point, someone's going to say like, this isn't worth my time. Like this is a hobby for me. Right? I have a full-time job. I have 2 kids and my wife's in her 3rd trimester. Like I have no free time. So for me to have like to be spending even time here, right? Like this is because I actually believe in what's happening here. I think the Cardano community is great. I want to see it thrive. That's why Elder and I wrote this proposal. So I think 1, community, 2, narrative. Crypto is extremely narrative driven. You need to stay on top of the narrative. You need to be continually evolving. The expectation is you will be replaced at some point in time. So you need to be continually evolving. You cannot just copy Uniswap V2 and expect that you will have a business forever, right? And then, okay, well, let's do the Curve stable swap. That's great too. But at some point, I do think, James alluded to that, I think this peer-to-peer kind of central limit order book style DEX will occur at some point in time. We're not there yet. That will replace a majority of these existing DEX frameworks, right? So you have to be continually evolving, continually researching, and continually understanding what's happening. And you're not going to be able to do that by yourself. Either you're going to be paying an arm and a leg for top talent, which, let's be honest, in Cardano, we don't have an arm and a leg to pay. So you got to find people in your community that are willing to do this work, maybe initially for free, and have some good conversations with you, and then start to comp them and stay on top of the narrative. So community and narrative, I guess, I think are extremely important here.
Elder, anything to add? Or
No, I mean, if you're going to put me after, what James and Marco had to say, I generally don't have a whole lot to add after that. I mean, I'm definitely very interested in kind of like the AI angle. I think one of the things that I'll just leave this as kind of a comment, just because I really can't add too much to what James and Marco said. One of the things that I've really appreciated in the crypto space in particular is that the barrier to entry to starting up a business is not super high, right? Like, in traditional finance, there's significant amounts of regulation and all kinds of other, like if I wanted to go and just write some kind of an application where it's just like some kind of a money donation application, that is somewhat challenging. Like if I actually want to be able to figure out how to like tie into the banking system, like that's nearly impossible, right? You have to have some kind of an intermediate. And that's not the case, especially on Cardano in particular, where it's just kind of like you have access to all of the financial mechanisms that you really need to start building things, right? So I would say, like at the very least for me, that's one of the exciting things about crypto is that, the barrier to entry as a developer and business owner is relatively low. Yeah, I guess that's about all I would say. I do have a lot of stuff to comment on the AI side of things because that's kind of my wheelhouse, but maybe that's for another time.
It would be very nice to have you and expand more on those concepts. I think it's very interesting. So maybe in another occasion, in another Fireside chat that we'll have soon, feel free to join and always invited.
That's a great round. Daniel, drop all your knowledge.
All right, I'm going to bring us home. The web is a way for entities to communicate with each other. I'm using the word entity because I believe in the age of a DAO, in the age of impending AGI, in the age of robots living amongst us, that we're going to have to expand our understanding of what it means to collaborate with each other. Web 2, like it came about at a point in time, like you were saying, James, at a point in time where the human relationship face to face really still mattered. You did not put a platform online without a consultant. You hired a web developer, you had a sysadmin, you had to do these things if you wanted to run a business. There wasn't, I'll just open up something on Facebook Marketplace or I'll run my entire company on WhatsApp like's happening in India today. And I think Web3 came about as this notion of a prosumer became real. Like if you remember, prosumers are like consumers, except they're also producing things. It's a term that is maybe not as endearing today as when it was pitched by the people making fancy cameras. But the idea is with Web3, everything seemed like it was possible, right? You could start a whole company just minting NFTs with random drawings. And it worked. Maybe it didn't work forever, but I believe that the opportunities, like you were even mentioning, Elder, the opportunities to start a business or try something, it became very real and very palpable. And I guess, the AI in the room here is the one that is kind of reminding me that while human relations are important, they're becoming more and more mediated. Right now, we're all in the same space as people, but it's actually a Zoom call. And I promise you, in 2019, this wouldn't have happened because everybody, like in my family, they would never have gotten on a Zoom call. Thanks to COVID and our, diaspora, we had to use tools like this. And, now we're used to it, but we prefer to go to conferences in the real world than watch them online these days. You don't really buy an online ticket to participate in a conference. It's like the dunce pass. You don't want to do that, right? And I feel that where this is all heading is something that I tried to address back in 2004 when I did my diploma thesis at Bauhaus in Germany. My thesis project was the argument that the representation of self has enough innate humanity in it to represent the person that it is a specter of. And I did that by building a real-time analog holographic projection system and convinced the thesis advisors that, yes, as a matter of fact, okay, your remote self represented locally has meaning and has value. And I personally want to hold on to that as long as possible. And yet I recognize, as someone who was born in the 70s, that this is changing. You know, we're getting these filters on our faces. The background is getting blurry. The context is getting kind of, well, it's what we make of it. And sooner or later, you're going to have AIs in your Zoom calls that are taking notes and sharing. Oh, wait, that's already happening.
Yeah.
Right. And like, I just want us all to be cognizant of the fact that these times are changing, and what it means to be human is not. We are still people, whether or not we're just pixels on a screen, a handshake at a conference, or our contributions to communities, to blockchains, to open source projects. It's all still part of being human. That's my outro.
Love it. Love it.
Thank you. Nice one. Yes.
If you found value in today, I would love or ask you to share the value about us and the enjoyment that we had. I think that I can speak for Davide that it was a really, really cool space.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And yeah, see you next time, I hope.
Thank you,
Thank you, guys.
everybody.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
See you guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Take care.
Thanks, Marcus. Thanks, Davide. Appreciate it. Daniel, see you guys.
Pleasure.
See you
Bye.
soon.